So Warren Smith, I want to thank you so very much for your time. And I want to continue our conversation from last October.
Oh, wow.
When we were driving back from Washington, D.C.
Oh, man, yes.
That for the Joe Chambers performance of M. Boom with a large orchestra. And it actually, there were 3 original members of M. Boom that day. And we lost Ray Mantia, who that was his last performance.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you had just, so before we start with you, if you had any profound memories of Ray Mantia.
Oh man, so many, you know. Boom Boom started out with just some drummers, you know. And right away we realized that we needed more of an African extension and presence in the midst of us. And so we tried a couple of different people whose names I won't necessarily mention, and the thing was that we couldn't find anyone that was really into African drumming who was really knowledgeable with jazz. And then somebody brought up Mantia's name and it just clicked. You know, 'cause everybody knew how into everything he was, you know. So Ray joined us and it was just such a smooth transition. But what that did was he enabled the rest of us to bring other small African percussion instruments in and meld them with his conga playing. You know, he was a magnificent congero. You know, we put sometimes 4 congas on different pitches and stuff and different rhythms, and all we'd have to do is color it up, and it kind of gave us a different identity from what we had before. So Ray was really a fantastic addition to the whole ensemble.
You know, I want to take you back. Before I take you back, I want to say, if you don't mind, if I introduce you as Professor Warren Smith, because of your contribution to the scholarship of the music that some people call jazz and what Max Roach called the America's indigenous music.
American classical.
And American classical music. And I want you to talk about your journey into being a music educator.
Okay. We can start with that.
Yes.
I was actually born into music. All my family was musicians. My mother played the harp, and she had a brother and sister. Brother and a sister. Sister was a concert pianist and organist, and her younger brother played the violin first. He met my father, and my father transferred him to the saxophone. There were a lot of jazz violinists, and the usual transition to get them into the music in the big bands was to let them play saxophone because it was a fairly easy embouchure to learn. So I watched that happen over and over again, you know. But violin was always a big part of it.
So now you grew up in a very musical family, and I want you to continue to talk about some of the things that was happening while you were growing up.
Oh man, it was fantastic. Most of my growing up that's memorable was on a street in Chicago called 58th Street.
Yeah.
East 58th Street. There was a elevated train that went through the neighborhood, and the express stop was right there. And up and down the street were a continuous line of stores.
Yeah.
You know, 3 corners were pharmacies on the southeast corner, the north and southwest corner of the block. There were 3 pharmacies. And there were 2 liquor stores and a bar. 2 bars. So there were 7 places within that one block where people could buy alcohol.
Right.
So naturally the parade of drunks was spectacular. My brother and I, when we were kids, would sit in that window and just watch the activity, you know, and see all kinds of crazy things. You know, one day a guy was walking down the side street and got robbed, and he had to walk through the neighborhood. All they left him with was his shoes and his hat. My dad had he had spent 5 years living as a musician and working in Paris.
Yeah.
So he came back, he was speaking fluent French, you know, and quite often when I would encounter some international people, I would use him as an interpreter, and he was just very fluent. But he was a horn repairman, which was probably as important as his musicianship, because we had everybody. Charlie Parker came to my house to get his horn fixed.
Yeah.
And I remember he was just a little bit taller than I was when I was a kid, you know, and well-built guy. But he would sit around and talk to me and my brother, you know, and pick up a saxophone and play, try things out, you know. I mean, my father taught Gene Ammons, Johnny Griffin, just an endless stream of Chicago musicians from that era. They were either coming to take lessons or coming to get their horns fixed constantly.
Wow. So what made your dad go into the repair of the horns? Because that's a whole another level of craftsmanship.
Yes.
So what was it that made him decide to go into that aspect of instruments and the repair of instruments?
It was never evident to me where he got the technology from to do that. But it was so inclusive that he would even get me to be his apprentice.
Yeah.
The saxophone has a lot of very delicate spots. There's a cork that fits around the neck of the saxophone that you slip the mouthpiece on. And that cork gets worn out. And so it has to be replaced, you know, maybe once or twice a year.
So now you had mentioned that the parts of the saxophone that gets the repetitive stress,
yeah,
whereby parts have to be replaced, yeah, periodically.
Yes, yes.
And that's the kind of some of the work that you and your dad did. So your dad had multiple revenue streams as a musician, as a person who repaired horns, and also he was a person who gave classes.
He was an educator. You know, almost every prominent saxophone player that you've heard of in the 40s came through my house.
Yeah. Name some of those musicians.
Gene Ammons, Johnny Griffin, Dexter Gordon came through to get his horn fixed. I mentioned Charlie Parker,
right,
Coleman Hawkins, all these people, when they would come to Chicago, that was the stop that they would make.
Right.
You know, to get the horn adjusted, to get, you know, any little minor repairs that had to be done, tune-ups and stuff. He had something that he called a leak light. You know, and the saxophone is curved like this, but it has pads on it. And you press the pads down, and my dad would take a small light on the string and put it in the horn. And when you close the pads, you could see if there was light coming through.
Right.
And he'd know that pad had to be replaced or resettled. You know, maybe it just had to be heated and put some more glue in to seal that leak, as they call it.
Right.
Because a leak in a saxophone is just, you know, it just destroyed what you were trying to do. It took half your energy.
Yeah, yeah. So that your dad led a pretty amazing life with all the different skill sets that he had.
Yeah.
So now, when was your first paid gig?
Oh man, I joined the musicians union when I was 12.
Right. And
I had my first gig right then. I played, because my dad had a little gig band, we called it, you know, and we worked. He was a member of the Elks, you know. In fact, there was an Elks Club center right up here on 155th Street.
Yeah.
You know, this was prominent in Chicago. Every place where you had a black community, they had an Elks Club.
Right. Now, what instrument were you playing at the time?
Saxophone.
You were a saxophone.
All we had in the house was saxophone.
Yeah.
He had everything from a soprano saxophone, which was my size, to a bass saxophone.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I couldn't handle, you know. But I could play a little bit the baritone and the tenor and the alto. I still have an alto up in my music room now.
Yeah.
You know, it's been years since I haven't tried, but all these things were just available to us because all these musicians were coming through, you know. And,
yeah.
you know, it was a constant stream of activity.
So now, when did you become a percussionist?
I went with my mother, and I was about 6 years old. You know, we had one car, and she would drive cops to the gig and come back and babysit for us. When the gig was over, like 11:30, 12 o'clock, she'd get in the car with us and go to pick him up and bring him home.
Yeah.
So we went in one day. There was a place, very prominent nightclub called the Rum Boogie, and it was a dance place and everything, but they had a big dance band. And we'd go in and pick pops up, and we were still on the bandstand, but over in the corner of the bandstand, there was a bass drum just sitting there.
Yeah.
It wasn't there. And the bass drum had a light in it. And the light was like going on and off and flickering. I looked at that and I said, oh, wow, what is that? So I ran over and I looked at it. And I told my dad, I said, I want to get that. I want to play the drum.
Yeah.
And so, now he was a music dealer and a music repairman.
Yeah.
So in those days, he could call up the Leather Drum Company, which was centered in in Chicago, and get anything he wanted for merchandise price, which was like 50% off. So he called up and got me my first drum set, and I still have that bass drum from that drum set now to this day. You know, but that started me, and the first gig I had was working in the Elks Club with his band. I didn't know much at all.
Yeah, what year was that?
I was 12 years old, so that was 1942.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Was that 12? No, 46. Yeah, 1946. Because that was, that was the year that I had joined the Musicians Union.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had learned how to read music, you know, so right away, you know, that happened. And then I started playing these little nightclub gigs at the Elks Club and different little clubs around town. And I did that until I went away to college.
Yeah. Now, where did you go to school?
I went to high school. I went to what they call Proviso Township High School. Now, Maywood, Illinois was about 20 miles west of Chicago's loop. And it was a neighborhood that had 20 blocks in it.
Yeah.
And all the black people lived between 11th Avenue and 14th Avenue.
Right.
Just those 4 blocks were the only place that they would sell houses to black people during that time. Now, what was ironic about this was that Second World War was happening.
Right.
Services were segregated. So they drafted all the black guys that lived in Maywood, Illinois. We were living out there with my grandparents and coming to Chicago on the weekends. And they sent all of the white recruits to Bataan.
Right.
Japanese white out. So within that next 3 or 4 years, all the black musicians, all the black soldiers came back, and Maywood became an all-black town. You know, it just spread out. Places where we couldn't rent houses before, all of a sudden we were black owners.
Yeah.
And now the whole town, Maywood, Illinois, is an all-black town. Proviso Township High School is an all-black school.
Yeah.
You know, there were like, out of 2,000 people, no, that was in college. No, it's about 2,000 people in that high school.
Yeah.
Maybe 400 of us from different neighborhoods were black. Now it's an all-black school.
Incredible.
You know.
So what was your musical education like there?
At 6, I started studying with a drummer named Buddy Smith. He was, you know, an associate of my father's. He taught me how to read music, basically. And then he got busy. He was going out of town. He was working with George Shearing. So my father hooked me up with Oliver Coleman, who was a prominent teacher. I mean, white guys were coming from the north side to study with him so that they could get into the studio with him, you know, quite a lot of reading. But he started me, taught me how to analyze music. And he taught me in such a way that I was able to teach that to other people. You know, which of course was my way to earn a living.
Right,
you know?
right.
You couldn't always do it just playing music. You know?
Right.
But I'd go to his house 2 days a week. We would walk to his house, his apartment. It was on the second floor of a 3-story apartment building on the south side. And there would be 5 or 6 guys waiting to take their lesson. And one person would go to the practice pad, and Mr. Coleman would, you know, he'd either praise you or admonish you for, you know, so the most embarrassing thing you could do was find a day that you didn't have your lesson practiced, and all the other students would watch him embarrass you, you know? But it was a beautiful discipline because everybody came in prepared. Right. You know, and when he taught me how to analyze music, by the time I went to high school, I was able to go right into the concert band right away. And when I got to college, I was able to do the same transition. But he had taught me how to analyze music, and I was encountering a lot of contemporary composers who were changing the styles of writing. But I was able to keep up with that because of this early training, you know.
But Warren, I want to stop you right there. I want to go into part 2. This is going to be a fascinating story, and I just want just a little bit more of your time, and I want to thank you very much for allowing me to the interview right here in the middle of Riverside Drive. And I want to thank you so much for your time.
Okay, no problem at all, man.